about it, and now you're going to be better. In fact, it doesn't work. I like to say that familiarity does not breed collaboration. It doesn't. Collaboration is a social thing. Here's another thing I discovered. Collaboration isn't natural. So we're social creatures, and relationship is natural to us. Being relational is natural. But collaboration only works under certain circumstances, right? And you had to create those circumstances. Here's the deal. What we found was that Mars had hired, like a lot of companies, IBM was another one, hired a lot of very driven individuals. People who love to make lists, tick it off when the job is done, move on to the next thing, get a pat on the back for it, get a good performance review at the end of the year for all the great things they've done as individuals. So Mars hired a lot of individually driven, achievement-driven people, okay? And then paid them as individuals, promoted them as individuals, recognized them as individuals, tick on down the list, rewarded them as individuals. What I realized was in order to get, so I was talking to these people, these interviews I did, I would talk to people about what would you say about collaboration in your team? I'd say, and these were good people. And these were teams that were producing good results. At the time I did this, Mars was doing really, really well. They did have a great year last year, but their business was really zooming, growing like 6% a year, which is a big deal in that kind of business. And I'd say, tell me about collaboration in your team. And the thing that kept coming up over and over again as I was poring over these interview snippets was, yeah, we probably should collaborate more. In fact, I know we should collaborate more, but we just don't. We just don't. Which really puzzled me because I thought, you're smart people, we're paying you good money. If you know you're supposed to do it, just do it. So this was that summer when I was doing the research, and I got a little stuck there until I realized, well, of course they're not collaborating because we hired them as individuals, we do all this other stuff as individuals, and the thing they default to is the job their boss gave them to do. Teamwork, on the other hand, was this good idea. It was on posters on the wall. There is no I in team, or the rowers at sunset with the word teamwork emblazoned across the top, and your boss telling you, be a good team player. But there was nothing, that was it. It was a good idea, a general vague notion of goodness. But the work was real and tangible, right? So people would turn to, when it came to going into the office every day or the factory, they would do what felt real to them, right? Individual effort. And what I realized was if we could make collaboration feel like just another thing on their list, like just another specific thing they could do and get credit for, and feel good about checking off, maybe then collaboration had a chance. So how do you make collaboration feel like individual achievement? To tap into this. It's a very Western motivator. We want to think about the people when you read in the old days where there used to be want ads. I guess they're still out there somewhere in some form, but you want self-motivated, self-reliant individuals, yada, 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 who are at the bottom good team players, right? So if we could tap into that, we could get collaboration. Now, when I worked at IBM, I was an executive coach. And one of the models they used, one of the psychological models they used at IBM was this theory, McClellan's theory of motives. And I learned about this individual achievement drive while I worked at IBM. I was very familiar with it, and I knew how to score the instrument that measured your motives. And so I went back to all my data, all the interview data, and that's how you determine motives. You look for keywords, and lo and behold, we had all these high achievers. So what I had to do was create a framework for teamwork that took individual motivation and married it with group dynamics. And that's the thing nobody had ever done before, right? And so I was in Tampa, Florida in 2011, and I was at a conference of, it's called the SIOP, Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. very fancy, a lot of Harvard people there, Princeton people talking about organizational psychology. And a guy who had written a book that I was really interested in was there. This big, tall Harvard professor named Richard Hackman. And he had been sort of an inspiration as I was formulating my framework, because his approach to teamwork was very practical, very pragmatic, versus all the relationship stuff. And so I walked up to him. I had this rough draft of the framework that I'd shown my colleague, and she said, you should check it out. And Dr. Hackman was a very shy guy, and he was standing at the back of the room. All his colleagues were up front talking about all their wonderful research and teams at Harvard. I said, Dr. Hackman, I loved your book. He said, really? Let's talk about it. And he took me outside. Bow tie, sleeves a little too short. And I explained to him what I was saying. Yeah, you inspired me. Here's what I did. And I described the whole thing, and he said, this is very unusual. Why, with all this stuff, including my work, he said, why would you create a bespoke team framework when you've got all this other good stuff out there, all the research that's been done? I said, it's just the kind of company Mars is. Mars wanted something that would work in its culture for its people, and it was worth the investment. I mean, it took thousands of hours of work to do this over a year and a half of development, and not every company does that. And it's one of the reasons it's worth the book, I think, and why the book deals with Mars so much, because it's true. Dr. Hackman was right. IBM never did it. I don't think Nestle's ever done it. I run into one other company, Tyson's Food, the people who make chicken, Tyson's Chicken. I talked to a person down there who's done a similar sort of thing, not as much research. He just kind of pulled stuff off the shelf and assembled it, but reached more or less the same conclusions, that old style team building is pretty much a waste of time. That if you marry individual motivation with team dynamics, you're going to get something that works better. And that's what the book's about. It's about how we made that discovery. The first third of the book is just background about Mars and the research I did and the stuff I left behind. And then this middle of the book is all about the new framework. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's got 6 parts, and each part has a set of tools and exercises. And the great thing is, there are my colleagues in the industry, in the team building industry, make a lot of money consulting the teams because they're smart psychologist type people. We designed something that the average manager can use. You can just take it down off the shelf, follow the instructions, and you can create a team that's going to work better together by virtue of just doing these things. Laid out, step by step, easy to comprehend. If you want the psychology stuff, it's in here, right? I talk about motives, I talk about team theory, but the middle of the book, which is where the framework is, and the tools are in the back of the book, that's the final third. You can just do it. You don't have to worry about any of that fancy psychological stuff. It doesn't mean, by the way, that conflict doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that relationships don't matter. They do. But they don't come first. That's another thing we learned, by the way. People start with relationships, again, thinking that's going to be what unlocks it. What we found is knowing the particular work that requires collaboration and understanding why the collaboration is important, not just to the company or your team, but to you individually, knowing that here and here, then partnering with somebody on something that really matters to you, that's where relationships build.